Exploring the Oil and Gas Supply Chain, Team 8, with Victor Balderas, Lauren Calandreas, Felicia Dillard, and Yvette Diallo.
Introduction. This report discusses the impact that Hurricane Harvey had on the gas and oil supply chain distribution in Texas. It explains the different aspects of the gas and oil operations and supply chain management. In addition, it discusses the main areas impacted by Hurricane Harvey and the challenges during this catastrophic event. Furthermore, the report will broach the readiness and preparation of retailers during this time and the recovery and lessons learned afterward. Included are interviews with several managers from different organizations in the oil and gas supply chain industry, such as HEB, Shell, Chevron, and Suncoast Resources, Inc. The interviews reflect their perspective on how the supply chain process could have been managed differently. Furthermore, it gives an idea of how supply chain management in the oil and gas industry can improve their business and implement contingency plans for future natural disasters. The purpose of this report is to understand the impact Hurricane Harvey had on the supply chain management in the oil and gas industry. It is also to better understand the challenges faced and provide an overall analysis of how these kind of catastrophic events can be managed differently in the future. Another purpose of this report is to identify and improve the business continuity, contingency, and disaster recovery plans in the oil and gas industry. Another purpose of this report is to assess the overall impact of the hurricane in the oil and gas industry, stakeholders, and communities.
But before we look into the impacts of Hurricane Harvey today, let's do a quick overview of the different aspects of the gas oil operations and supply chain management. Right here we have the 5-step supply chain process for fuel. In order to have fuel, it first must be located. Geologists first locate oil sources around the globe. Oil sources can be found in many different regions around the globe, including oceanic regions, where they have to take into account the oceanic depths from the water before even reaching the Earth's crust for the drilling process. Geologists undergo huge exploration projects and use their knowledge of the structure of the rocks, satellite images, gravity meters, and other technologies to find oil sources. The drilling process is required to extract the crude oil from the Earth's surface. Since the crude oil is hidden miles and miles from the Earth's surface, it requires heavy-duty and very large drills along with numerous amounts of hired workers for the process to take place. Once the crude oil is extracted from the Earth's surface, it goes through a stage called the refining process, where the crude oil is transformed to petrol and diesel fuel mixed with additives. From the oil refineries, the fuel is taken to distribution centers. From the distribution centers, they do additional tests to make sure the fuel is at great quality and meets expectations. Right then is where us, the consumer, will pay for the fuel from the distribution centers to fill our vehicles' gas.
The next section covered will discuss the oil and gas companies of interest. We interviewed Shell, Chevron, HEB, and Suncoast Resources managers. What we determined was that they had normal operations up until the day before Hurricane Harvey hit land. At that point, there was a spike in demand for fuel, and that caused an increase of fuel requests from various retailers and gas stations. Many companies ran out of fuel within hours of the gas trucks coming to distribute new fuel. There was a delay in distribution, and that caused some stores to shut down their pumps. What we discovered is that gasoline prices did increase during these disastrous events. Taking a look at the prices from July of 2017, they were roughly at $2.23 per gallon, and that jumped up to $2.53 in September 2017, right when the hurricanes hit. You can also see the sharp increase on the graph listed. There were various refineries that were forced to close, shut down, and minimize their production during this time period. And taking a look at their total capacity versus their national capacity, this did impact not only local areas, but also nationally.
Many challenges created during Hurricane Harvey greatly impacted the oil and gas supply chain. A few examples of these challenges include refining and chemical plant shutdown, drain on bulk storage facilities, inability to unload crude oil from offshore tankers, local fuel delivery bottleneck, and the absence of all grades of fuel at our local fueling stations. Unfortunately, this wasn't just a problem in the San Antonio area. The impact has been felt by the entire Southeast and all along the East Coast due to the Colonial Pipeline shutdown. The day Hurricane Harvey was to make landfall in the Corpus Christi Bay area, many Texas residents began to panic about the possibility of refinery shutdown. This created mass panic at gasoline stations all over the state of Texas, but more strongly felt in metropolitan areas such as San Antonio, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and even Houston. Unfortunately, gas stations were not prepared for such mass chaos. They quickly began to run out of fuel and had no idea how long it would be before fuel would be redelivered. Some stations who received fuel quickly ran out again. Finally, an announcement is made by the Texas Railroad Commissioner, Ryan Sitton, that there was plenty of fuel, that there was no threat of a shortage, and people should only purchase fuel if necessary. Although this announcement came too late to deter the drain on the supply, it may have somewhat slowed the effects. Unfortunately, the damage had already been done. This created a ripple effect through the supply chain that would ultimately take weeks to overcome. In some areas, it's taken months to restore fuel supplies back to normal quantities. This has had a devastating impact on small mom-and-pop stations who were at the mercy of the local fuel delivery companies. Many of these stations will not recover from their losses.
Manager action. One challenge faced following Hurricane Harvey in the retail segment of the supply chain was a shortage in the supply of gas. This was due to an increase in demand for gas. Retailers could have responded to this challenge by using multiple suppliers so that the risk would have been mitigated in the long term, so that in the event of a natural disaster, the supply chain would not be disrupted. Furthermore, another challenge that retailers faced was controlling the large crowds of upset customers frantically trying to get gas. This retailer could have responded in a short-term manner so that the risk would have been mitigated by imposing a daily limit on the amount of gas each vehicle was allowed to pump. This would have most likely resulted in upset customers, but it may have been beneficial in helping to control the supply of gas. That in turn could have helped reduce the shortage of gas. A challenge that was faced by Suncoast Resources Inc. was that they could not distribute the gas fast enough to retailers because their employees could only work a certain amount of hours a day due to regulations. A way this distributor could have responded to this crisis in the short term so that the risk would have been mitigated would have been to contract additional truck drivers while there was an increase in the demand.
In conclusion, Hurricane Harvey had an immense impact on the oil and gas supply chain distribution in the state of Texas. The effects are still being analyzed and processed as recovery continues throughout the coastal region. The true impact and costs have yet to be completely determined. How has the impact changed the way the oil and gas supply chain operates? Have we, the consumers, learned anything from our careless actions? Well, time can only tell. It seems as though there was never a fuel shortage on paper, yet hundreds of consumers were unable to obtain fuel for a sustained period of time. Let's hope that we can learn from our mistakes and ensure we are more prepared in future disasters.